I am here, Rob. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
So, good afternoon, everyone.
As
And thank you
before
so
you
much.
start, do you want me to keep the slides up, or are you going to do them?
Yes, if you could, please, and I'll tell you when to move them forward.
No problem.
So thank you all so much for joining early. Just a quick note on the screen there, please do have pen and paper ready because this is an interactive session this afternoon. I'm just very, very mindful that you are allocating an hour of your time, and I know how precious everyone's time is. So I just really want to make sure that today is really valuable for you. So next slide, please, Rob. Just quickly, let's have a look at the IMechE values. And the reason that I'm highlighting that is because part of today's session is going to be built around values. So as we think about values, so ours at the institution are all around inclusion, integrity, innovation, and impact. So next slide, please, Rob. When we think about these values, they're actually at the core of everything that we do. And during the presentation today, we're going to be talking about personal values, but also how they relate to your role and to the business that you're in. So this is basically what we're going to be covering. These are the items here on the agenda. I have got quite a few slides to share with you this afternoon. So if I slip over some of them quite quickly, please just do rest assured that you have, as you've registered for this webinar, you have full access to the whole slide deck on the LMS, which will give you some context for what we're going to be talking about today. And there is also an accompanying worksheet for you to support you in terms of taking action after the webinar. So next slide, please, Rob. This is essentially what we're going to be covering now. The reason that some of this is important is it gives you a roadmap for today's webinar. So we're going to be talking a little bit about personal development, why it's important and what sits underneath that. And then we're going to be going forward into your why, your values, your goals. We'll be touching on emotional intelligence and the impact of change. And we're also going to be looking at a growth mindset. So next slide, please, Rob, if you could move on to the one, the presenter slide, which is slide number 6. Great. So just as a quick intro, my name is Roberts. I'm the Senior Program Manager here at the IMechE. And my focus is very much on anything non-technical. So that's leadership, commercial, management, and coaching. Now you've heard a little bit about me. What I'd love you to do, mind, is for those of you who haven't already introduced yourself, please do pop in there your name, and for those and where you're from, and for those of you who have already introduced yourself, what's your role and why are you here today? What are you hoping to do in this webinar? That's really critical for me because I monitor the chat and ensure that as I progress through the content, that it is aligned to your needs and your requirements. So if you could move ahead to slide number 8, please, Rob. Great, thank you. So what is personal development and why does it matter? So the whole premise of personal development is understanding that right now you can choose to be a better version of yourself than you were earlier this morning, for example. And the way that we do that is by assessing who and what we are, where we're going, and how we're doing that. So it's that whole assessment process. Now, it's a conscious process and it begins with a desire and a commitment to develop yourself, to be a better person this afternoon than you were this morning. And it's driven by an understanding of the benefits and the positive impact that personal development can have, both on ourselves and on others as well. So in terms of your potential, which is something that I've highlighted on that slide, I just want to make the point that potential is not a static state. So as your capacity grows, so does your potential and expands as a result. So people's personal development journey usually begins in their 20s, sometimes into their 30s. And that's when they realize that there's more to them than they were initially aware of, and that they can and fully intend to become a better version of themselves. So it starts with that choice and that decision. So next slide, please, Rob. Underneath personal development sits self-awareness. Now, self-awareness is essentially, in order to assess, we need to understand. And that's where self-awareness comes in. So self-awareness is what governs your understanding of yourself, your strengths, your beliefs, your habits, your values. So all of these things, what we do well, what we don't do so well. And that is what forms your unique individual blueprint, if you like, at the very, very deepest level. And you become aware of areas that you may wish to focus on and develop. And so that's when your personal development process begins. So I want to just quickly touch on the becoming part, because this is about fulfillment. It literally means that you're constantly filling up the contents of your body with the fiery, positive, expansive energy that comes from consistently discovering more about who you are. So I hope that makes sense. Because self-awareness is an ongoing process. It means that you're constantly filling yourself up with new insights, new levels of understanding, which in turn govern your behavior and the impact that you are able to make. So next slide, please, Rob, which is a quick quote. And the reason that I put this in there and that I find this quite interesting is it makes the point that self-awareness leads to development, which in turn leads us to acquire the skills that we need to future-proof our career and in turn the organisation. But of course, these are not just personal skills. These are not just professional skills, these are personal skills too. And both impact each other. So when we're in the process of discovering and using our strengths and bringing our whole best selves to work, for example, this inevitably impacts our personal lives as well. So let's just quickly have a think about who or what is our true self. Next slide, please, Rob. So this was taken from an amazing TED talk. I've put the link down there for you, by a lady called IMechE. It's called The Art of Being Yourself. And I really love the analogy that she used here, where she said, we come complete with one true note that we were destined to sing. So at the very core of you, you will never, ever, ever change. There is that one unchanging, complete aspect of yourself that then expresses itself in a number of different ways throughout your lifetime, as you become a parent, as you become a manager. So hopefully, what I'd like you to do as we go through today's webinar is think about this aspect of yourself, the core of who you are. And I'm going to talk you through why that's important. So if you do want to watch it, if nothing else, it is very entertaining. It's also incredibly profound. And if nothing else, it will make you pause and give you some food for thought. So could you move on to the next slide, please, Rob? So I've got a question for you, and this question is going to lead us seamlessly into the rest of today's presentation. Who are you? Who are you? And as I mentioned earlier, this is a question that you will be answering in a number of ways and will be demonstrated in a number of ways throughout your lifetime. But I want you to write down today one positive thing about yourself that you absolutely know to be true. one thing about yourself that you know to be true. So it could be, I'm thoughtful. People tell me that I'm empathic. I'm kind. I'm a genius at doing X, Y, and Z in my role. I'm up there with the best at it. So what is the one thing that people always tell you, oh, you're so good at X, Y, and Z? Write down that one thing. And whilst you're doing that, think about the things that people have always told you. Great, thank you, Nathaniel. I've just seen that come through in the chat box. I'm a quick learner. Amazing. And actually, that is an excellent kind of overarching theme, if you like, as we progress through this, because what that will do is that will help you having a belief or an awareness of yourself as someone who is a quick learner can then feed into some of the areas that we're going to be touching on today. So throughout my life, people have always said to me things like, I'm very strong, I've got great empathy, I'm strategic, I'm positive. And so I'm going to give you an exercise to do after today's webinar, but I'd like you to write this down. I want you to message about 30 people. That was how I did it. And I want you to ask those 30 people close to you who know you really well, both in and outside of the workplace, for the 3 characteristics or 3 qualities that they most associate with you. And that will give you tremendous insight into how other people see you. But it's quite rare to get that kind of insight from other people. Usually we have to wait for a feedback session, something a lot more formal. But please do that exercise, because when I did it, there were recurring themes that came through in that were really illuminating for me. I was able to see myself probably for the first time as other people see me. So if you've written down that one thing about yourself, how do you flesh that out? How do you bring more of your whole self to life? So we'll be looking at this next as we explore your direction of. So if you could move forward to slide 14, please. So just take a picture of that. That was just the task that I had recommended that you do. And I really, really cannot recommend this enough. It was an excellent exercise for me when I did it. And some of it was quite surprising. So if you could move on to slide 16, please. We're going to look at where you're going and why. So when you think about your goal, one of the key things that I would say to you is that it has to matter. It has to be sufficiently important to you that it's motivating for you and that it's something that you can commit to. So the secret to goal setting, and I am going to be giving you a structure for it, but the real secret to goal setting is building in emotion around it. So what will happen if I do this? And what will happen if I don't do it? So that critical element of emotion is quite often missed in goal setting. But as I said, is the one thing that's going to keep you focused on your goal and make it happen really quickly for you. So it's key to have something really specific. The most important goals are the ones that you know you must do. And that if you don't do it, in 20 or 30 years' time, when you look back, you'll regret it. So I don't want that for you. I want you to look at consolidating that one or those 2 big goals for yourself in some measure today, to at least give those some thought so that you can start focusing your attention on them. So if you could move to the next slide, please, reflective practice. So before we go on, what I'd like you to do is just take a moment to think about the one thing that you know you must do. want you to write it down and maybe even stick it on a post-it note somewhere. So for some people that I've spoken to, they want to write a book. Another guy that I was speaking to a few days ago wants to write a marathon, wants to run a marathon. For him, that would be like a peak experience, and it would be something that he could look back on with real pride. Some people have a career goal that they want to achieve. That's so important to them that they feel that they won't be fulfilled in their career, and their ambitions won't be realized unless they achieve that one goal. So write that down now. And my challenge to you is to think about how you're going to accomplish that. So as I said, I can give you some guidelines today, but I want you to keep reflecting on it. Reflect on it last thing before you go to bed in the evening. And think about what you can do in terms of small, medium, and larger size actions, and what beliefs and habits you need to build around in order to achieve it. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at goals. If you wouldn't mind moving to slide 19, please, Rob. So there should be a diagram coming up for you shortly. And as you can see at the bottom there, values are the foundation, if you like. So just in the same way as I talked about values at the beginning this morning, and I talked about IMechE's values and how they govern the way we think and the way we behave towards each other, towards our customers, our delegates, they're our starting point. So in the same way, your values are your starting point. Think of them as like the foundation to your building. So in a moment, I'm going to give you a list of values, and I'd like you to think about which 3 values most apply to you. But before I do that, I just want to reinforce something for you. Values are essentially, as I said, what fuel and propel us, also our thoughts, our behaviors, our actions, and our decision. So our values essentially set the direction that we follow in life, a little bit like a compass. And I want you to think of them in those terms, that they're like a compass that show you the way and enable you to say yes to one thing and no to something else. So they define who we are, but they also define who we want to be, who we're in the process of becoming. So our values are always positive, they're always aspirational, and they encourage to be more of they encourage us to be more of the person that we already are. So I hope that makes sense. Now, a good question to ask yourself is whether your drivers, once you've identified them, either expand or narrow your goals. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here, but your drivers are essentially how you make sense of the world. So your drivers are things like understanding how you make decisions, how and why you behave the way you think you do, and how you communicate with others. So they're the ways that we learned to adapt to our environment when we were young, and they continue to influence us now. So as you begin or as you continue on your personal development and your self-awareness journey, please do take a moment to think about the things that drive you and to think about whether they're still relevant to you for now. So could you move me on to the next slide just briefly, quickly? Thank you. So I just want to touch on behaviors before we move on to the values list. And I just want to say that it's not just about who we are, but how we faithfully express and reflect who we are is reflected in our behaviors. So everything that we say and do reflects what we believe about who we are, our environment, our work, the person that we are. and our place within all of that. So everything on the previous slide ultimately feeds in to our behaviors, our actions, and our results. So as you can see, everything on the previous slide on that pyramid is intimately connected. Thanks, Rob. So if you move through to slide 21, I've actually popped the pyramid on there as well. So I want you to just take a second, look at that list. It is not a definitive list. There are hundreds of values that you can choose to embody. And just think to yourself, which one or two of those stand out to me? Or where does my mind travel as I'm reading through these? Does it travel to say, does humility lead me through to service, for example? Does honesty lead me through to transparency? And does that then lead me through to authenticity? So allow your mind to expand around some of these values and write down the 3 that are the most, that impact you the most. So you can change these as your life goes on, and you know, your career progresses, your relationships deepen, but some of them will remain constant throughout your life. And that's an activity that people very rarely do, but we find that when we talk about this in our courses, it's really well received because, as I say, it's something that we rarely do, but these values underpin everything. And they're going to be the foundation that you build essentially the rest of your life on, because they will govern the decisions that you make and the people and the opportunities, the businesses, and the experiences that you align yourself with going forward. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a quick think about that. Obviously, we're very limited on time today. So, as I say, you've got full access to these slides through the LMS and a worksheet that accompanies this as well. So if you could move on to the next slide, please, Rob. Thank you. So when you write down your values, the key is not to overthink it. And if you're a little bit stuck, which sometimes does happen when people do this exercise for the first time, think about somebody that you respect and admire. What do you think governs their behavior? What do you think their values are, and how are they reflecting them in the way they think, behave, believe, and communicate? So then think about, could you embody those values? Maybe you already do without realizing. So if nothing's coming to you straight away, as I say, think about somebody that you know, maybe somebody you have known a while ago who's an inspiration to you, maybe somebody who mentors you, maybe somebody that you've seen online and you love, you know, their stuff, you feel that it has a positive influence on you, and think about what governs their behavior and what you could adopt as a result. So if you could move on to the next slide, please, Rob. So we touched earlier on drivers, and I'm hoping that what I'm going to do next is going to help bring that to life a little bit for you. So thinking about drivers in the workplace, these are the most common career drivers. So some of them are self-explanatory. I'm going to touch on a couple for you just to help bring them to life. And I want you to think about which one is your main driver. So if you're an expert, for example, you're driven by the need to be the best at what you do within your field. That means that you're going to be researching trends around your area of expertise. You're going to be networking with like-minded people to expand your mind around that particular area. You're going to be thinking about ways that you could develop your subject, roles that you could take, where you could do more of it, and also how you could widen the scope of your field of expertise. You would also probably be looking at gaps that you see within your area of expertise and how you could look to fill them. So the creatives are people who look to take roles where they can really stretch that creative muscle, think more widely, think outside the box, think more strategically as well. So how they can put that creative element into practice. Creatives have got great imagination, and that's particularly important for engineers. And I've seen that time and time again, you know, as we delivered courses to engineering delegates, you know, that ability to be creative is a really critical component of an engineer's day-to-day. So somebody who's creative and has that focus as a driver will be looking for jobs where they can have a tangible, positive impact in some way. So there are 10 other sort of key things here. So with helpers, you're quite often the glue between a team, and you're people that truly want to make a difference. You might have, you know, other people might have started their life like that, and then they might have taken a different turn. But people who are helpers and who want to make an impact in the world, that will never change for you. In whatever role you take, that will be one of the things that's at the foundation of your decision, you know, to do that role. So just write down which one you think you are. So if you could go on to the next slide, please. Thank you, Rob. So one of the important things that we need to be very, very mindful of when we're thinking about our self-development, when we're pursuing our goals, and when we're looking to deepen our understanding of who we are and how we present ourselves in the world, is what your psychological capital is, what your capacity is, not just in terms of how you fulfill your role within work and within your family, but how you cope with change, how you cope with feelings of, say, overwhelm and stress, for example. That's your psychological capital. So I want you to think of that in terms of fuel in the engine. We touched on that a little bit earlier when we spoke about values and drivers. This is just another way of looking at that. And the reason that this is so important is because in order to achieve your goals, you have to have the energy, the internal energy to be able to do so. And your psychological capital is what governs your internal energy. So I want you to score yourself out of 10 on each of these 4 areas. So I feel hopeful that I can achieve my goals. I believe in my ability to overcome my challenges, etc., etc. So just give yourself a score out of 10 and then total that out of 40. So your psychological capital is essentially, it's like your resilience. It's what helps you get over the humps when you're powering towards your goals. So think about what challenges have you overcome and how have you done that? What strengths have you used to overcome those challenges? And then what I'd like you to do is keep hold of this and rate yourself again in 3 months, in 6 months, and look at and assess how your psychological capital has changed. So when you think about your score changes, what I find with delegates is quite often what's happened is they might have made better use of their network, for example. They might have joined a gym and they're suddenly feeling a lot stronger, a lot more flexible, a lot more energized, a lot more mentally alert and healthy. And all of that has fed in to their psychological capital as a result. Things like changing your diets, getting closer to your family, improvement in relationships, for example. All of those feed into your resilience. So I hope that makes sense. Just give me a yes in the chat box if all of this is making sense so far. As I said, it's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but we do touch on all of this in our personal effectiveness course. And as I say, I will be taking questions at the end, as many as we've got time for, but please do feel free to pop any questions, any thoughts, any observations in the chat box for me, because I am keeping an eye on that. So we go on to the next slide, please, Rob. Thank you. So if you've done your, thank you so much, all of you. It's great to know that I'm not talking into a void. So I want to talk to you just very quickly about goals. So hopefully you've been able to score yourself out of 40 on your resilience. Now, there's an increasing amount of research out there, especially in the field of neuroscience, that tells us that goal setting is incredibly important in terms of achieving our goals, and being very conscious, very intentional about how we set our goals. So essentially, just to give you a little bit of background on that, the human brain loves to predict the future. And the reason that it loves to do that is because when it can accurately predict the future, it feels like it's keeping us safe. And that's its job, is to keep us safe and to keep us healthy and thriving. And so in that way, our brains are geared up to create a safe and familiar future that is not too far away. So the brain needs clarity, it needs predictability, and it needs assurance. And so the best way to achieve your goals, and obviously to help your brain out at the same time, is to take a moment to think clearly about the change that you want to create and the goals that you want to attain. And then challenge yourself to expand a little bit beyond your comfort zone. So your brain is elastic and it has the capability to create new structures and new pathways within it. So for example, when you learn a new language, your brain creates new connections. And in the same way, when you stretch yourself a little bit and you go for a goal that's slightly challenging, not too much that it freaks you out and you think, well, I can't do that. But when it's slightly challenging and it's going to require you to harness some of those internal resources that we've talked about so far, those are the best goals. So the way many people do that, and the way I talk to people on my courses with the IMechE about doing that, is to use positive reinforcement, positive self-assurance. So say things to yourself like, I know what I'm doing, I'm capable of so much more, I can do anything I set my mind to, I'm a powerhouse once I get going. So any variation of those. And I want you to just jot that down. What would be the thing that you would tell yourself if you were truly and wholeheartedly in pursuit of your goals and determined that you weren't going to live with that regret 20 or 30 years down the line, that you were going to achieve the thing that is the most important for you? What one thing do you think you could say to yourself? Okay, I'm coming to that. Thank you so much. So I'm gonna talk you through what that stands for. But the last thing I want to say to you is that these affirmations, they support the mind, brain, and body connection, and they're going to support you in achieving bigger goals and taking bigger leaps forward. So what does STRAM stand for? Can you put on the next slide, please, Rob? Okay, so it's slightly similar to the old SMART goals, but there are some differences. Is your goal trackable? Now, what does that mean? In reality, what it means is, have you got a process for determining how close or how far you are from your goals at any given time, and how successful you are in your pursuit of them. So to give you a very basic example, you know, in one of the goals that I'm going for, one of the ways that I would have tracked it is how many people have I spoken to about this? What is the quality of the feedback that they've given me? How far has that moved me along, knowing what I know now? So you track your goals by the actions that you take. And those are the things that let you know that you're moving forward. So is it relevant to you? Well, relevant, I think, is a little bit wishy-washy. We talked earlier about big, meaningful, moving goals, things that are really going to motivate you because they have an emotional component. So that's where motivating comes in. So how much motivation and desire do you currently have to embark on this goal? Is it enough? And if it's not enough, what on the pyramid that I showed you earlier do you need to work on in order to accelerate that motivation? And maybe it's not the right goal for you. Maybe that after you've worked through that pyramid, you'll realize that perhaps it wasn't as important to you as you originally thought. Maybe it isn't quite as aligned with your goals and your values as you'd originally thought it was. So that's stram, and that's why I think it's a really useful model for us to take into account when we set goals. So can you pop on the next slide, please, Rob? So this is a little bit about the neuroscience that I touched on earlier, and there's a lot of research around this. And look at yourself around plasticity, goal setting, and change. You know, the whole area around why change, doing something different, and stretching ourselves create these new pathways that are that lead to more expansive thinking. Because once you've learned, for example, a new language, those pathways are there, and they can be used not just to learn another new language, but they can do other things as well. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, what I'd like you to do after this webinar, if you could put on the next slide, Rob, please, is really hold yourself to account here, because I've taken up quite a bit of your time already. I don't want this time to be wasted. And I want you to download these slides, this as if it's already happened. Now, I just want to add something in here. Every single time I've done this exercise, those things have happened for me. And there is no doubt in my mind that that's not down to chance. So I do the exercise and then I do it, and I continue to make it, to keep it alive in my day-to-day life. So the important thing with this is to write it as if it's already happened, to write it in the present tense. That's what makes this exercise so powerful. So I put an example down there for you. Time yourself for 4 minutes and just jot it down, maybe in your lunch break today. Can you just pop the next slide on, please, Rob? In fact, just move ahead to one. So I just want to quickly touch on a few areas, a few last areas for you. This is all around emotional intelligence and around fixed. We're going to be looking at fixed and expansive or growth mindset. So why is emotional intelligence really important? Could you move to the next slide, please, Rob? So when we're looking to make changes and to achieve our goals, to maybe achieve bigger goals than we have done in the past, maybe it's the right time for you to do that. Emotional intelligence feeds into these next 4 areas. So if you can move on to the next slide, number 33, please, Rob. So self-awareness, which we've already spoken about, self-management, social awareness, and social management. So these are essentially the level of self-awareness that we have. We've already talked about that. How we manage ourselves. So at a very basic level, if you're really tired and you're quite overwhelmed and it's 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, you're going to have to manage yourself and your emotions a lot more carefully, and your workload, for example, a lot more carefully than you would have had to if you'd had 8 hours sleep and you were absolutely raring to go. And you had a clear day in front of you with very little meetings or demands placed on you. So social awareness is really around awareness of the impact that we make on others. And social management is how we manage that impact. So if you're not making the impact that you want to make, that is all around the area of social management in emotional intelligence. So can you put the next slide on, please? And I realize that we're not machines. It's not always possible to manage ourselves in the way that we would like to. We're human at the end of the day. But again, if you set your intention, if you have an awareness of what these different components are, and you set your focus on doing it, you're going to do a much better job than you would have been able to do otherwise. So these just kind of outline these few different areas for you in a little bit more detail. And the last thing that I'd say about emotional intelligence is just to be aware. As I said earlier, you're not a machine. You're not going to be able to do a perfect job. No one is expecting you to. But at the very least, be intentional about learning from your mistakes and try not to repeat them. Can you put the next slide on, please, Rob? So Carol Dweck and the next one to the poll. So Carol Dweck was a professor of psychology. And Rob, if you wouldn't mind getting the poll ready in a second, or just, whenever you're ready. So, and she was the one who sort of coined the theme around growth mindset. She's a professor of psychology at Stanford University. And she's done some extensive work into growth mindset. So it was originally from the 80s, and although she focused it on school children, as it turned out, all of the body of work that she produced then, we now know can be applied to adults. So if you could just pop that poll up whenever you're ready. So I think... Yeah, if you so for all of you listening, hopefully that poll's come up for you. Lovely. And if you could just click your answers. Thank you so much. So moving on to the next slide, just in view of time, and I'm just aware that I want to leave some time for questions. So if you could move on to the next slide, please, Rob. Thank you. And then the following one. So this is around the study that I just spoke to you about regarding growth mindset. And these are, if you like, the areas to be aware of. And you can see that these two mindsets represent very different thinking and therefore very different outcomes for the people involved. So what are some of the things that we can do to support us in developing and growing a growth mindset? Next slide, please, Rob. So these are some of the things that we can do, and the worksheet that I've got for you covers growth mindset in a lot more detail. So it's going to give you lots of pointers and lots of context for that. And finally, on to the next slide, please, Rob. So as we approach questions for this webinar, I want you to be really mindful of these things that I've just talked to you about, that the brain is malleable and it can learn and develop new things, especially if it is supported with the correct mindset, with a growth mindset, and with beliefs, with values, and an awareness of our drivers that all feed into that. Our attitude is everything. So that is our intention. So if you, and your attitude again is defined by your values. So I always recommend that you emphasize growth over speed, because this is a lifelong journey. You know, once you commit to personal development and to self-awareness, this isn't going to suddenly come on today or tomorrow like a light bulb. It's going to come over a period of time. But the best leaders and the best teams that I've worked with all have high emotional intelligence. They have a growth mindset, and they are incredibly self-aware, and they have an internal energy that reflects that. And they're all people that acknowledge and embrace their imperfections and are constantly working towards improving that. So coming back to where we started, doing what challenges you will expand your capacity for achievement and will enable you to develop yourself personally and professionally. So it means that you're making a shift from no, I can't to yes, I can, regardless of how overwhelming or how frightening that change might seem to you. Okay, can we go on to slide 43, please? Wheel of Life. So I just want to highlight this for you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. So next slide. Yeah. So next slide with the image of the Wheel of Life. So slide 43. Great, thank you. So I've done this, and a long time ago, I found it really useful. The reality is it's very, very hard to keep all of these different areas in balance. And the reason I've put up there is that there is an exercise that you can do where you grade yourself out of 10, you know, in along these different sections of the pie. And there's a lot of different ways of representing the Wheel of Life. I think it's a great idea, but I also think that in this day and age, when we're all so busy, it can be slightly impractical and put too much pressure on us if we're looking to keep all of these balls in the air at the same time. So what I recommend is that you focus on one area and you develop that area, you build that into your goals. Okay, can we move on to slide 45, please? Great. Okay, so on to slide 45. Thank you. So really what this does as we finish up for today is just act as a reminder, hopefully, of everything that we've talked about in terms of personal development and why it matters to you, why it should matter. I mean, not just the fact that it gives you a competitive edge in the workplace, and I've had this proved out time and time again, but it will enable you to feel fulfilled. And that's where happiness comes from. And that should be all of our drive, really, is to be happy, to feel more happy in our lives. And I think sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that. So, can we move to the next slide, please? One of the things that you can do for yourself, and I recommend that you perhaps do this with a manager, somebody that you report into, maybe you can do this with your team, is to create something of a personal development plan that feeds into that goal. And it will help keep you on track. So whether you use stram or whether you use an outline like this, use something to help keep you on track, and ensure that you are committed and accountable. Okay, next slide, please, Rob. Okay, I'm just waiting for some of the copy to come up on that learning review slide, but in case it doesn't, I'm going to read it out to you. With every passing year, and this is my belief, and this is how I live my life, with every passing year, your job is to be better and better at being who you really are. So first, and that process of identifying who you really are, as I said, is going to grow and change over time. Things that matter to you when you're in your 20s are not going to matter to you in your 40s. You're going to have a different focus. Your life is going to look like a completely different picture in some cases. Ask yourself, what makes me special and unique? And how can I be more of that? How can I express more of that in my day-to-day life, in my work? And if you're at an interval of possibility, i.e., if you're at a point in your life now where you're open to change and you want to fulfill yourself and your purpose, and pursue a goal that matters, a goal that's meaningful for you, then grab opportunities that support your goals and grab them with both. And my final question to you is, are you ready to explore and expand into your potential? Not everyone is. And as I said earlier, that's a lifelong journey. But if you are ready, look back over what you've written today, download these slides from the LMS, and I am now, in the remaining time that we've got left, fully open for questions. So if you just pop the last slides on, thank you, Rob. So just pop your questions in the chat box, and I am going to continue to keep an eye on those.
Thank you, Alison. We've got a couple already. You did the number scoring out of 40 earlier. I got one question about that. Does a low number indicate mental illness, e.g. anxiety?
Not necessarily. It can indicate that your level of resilience is low today. I would definitely, because I don't know your unique situation and what's going on in your life, it could be that you need to reassess how you're managing yourself, perhaps make use of your network, perhaps make use of a trusted friend to discuss that with, and get a better understanding of why that was low and what actions you can take. But I wouldn't assume that it necessarily means something. I would want to find out a little bit more first. So that's what I'd recommend that you do. And also remember that, as I said, your scores are not static. They will change. In 3 months, your score is going to be very different to what it was now.
Next question, Alison. I had a CPD review and was advised to demonstrate more reflective practice. Could you expand on this?
Okay, so you broke up a little bit, but I'm thinking that was around reflective practice. So
it was, yeah.
Essentially, great. So essentially, reflective practice is now common practice. It's something that is assumed that if we're working as part of a team in any position of responsibility, a leader, a manager, it's assumed that we have this process in place. And essentially, it's really straightforward. It's really simple. At its most basic level, you can ask yourself, what am I doing well? What am I not doing so well? What am I going to keep? What am I going to change? I have a reflective practice that I tend to do on a Saturday morning. So on a Friday, I go over my week and I set my goals for the following week. And what that does, it enables me to draw a line under work. So that's a form of reflective practice. I look at what I did well, what I didn't do so well, what I'd like to change and do differently.
Great.
And then on a Saturday morning, on a Saturday morning, I sometimes do a bit of a deeper practice where I look at how what I've done this week fits into my overarching goals, my bigger goals, because that helps keep me on track, in a much bigger way, so that I don't reach the end of the year and think, well, I've done all these little things, but actually I haven't achieved the goal that I really wanted to achieve, which was the big one I set out at the beginning of the year. So hopefully that helps. It only needs to take 20 or 30 seconds. You don't need to make a big thing about it. And the other thing that I would say is listening to yourself is a really, really good way of developing a reflective practice. Sometimes we say things that we don't mean. And when you take the time to slow down the way you speak and be a little bit more present, you're going to catch some of these things. And that's going to enable you to reflect on them without being in any way critical or disparaging of yourself and the context for it. But just think to yourself, okay, I did that and that wasn't really what I meant, or that doesn't really reflect who I am as a person. I'm going to respond differently next time.
Thank you, Alison. Next question. Before we go to the next question, you'll see on the screen some of the courses that we do, which will further enhance this information. Some of the comms and influencing and the personal effective masterclass, I think Alison mentioned earlier. And Rob has put links to these courses in the chat box further up. Next question we have here is, how can I move forward in improving myself and telling myself what I'm good for if I'm not aware of my weak points?
Oh, that's really interesting. That's a great question. So you can use the activity that I gave you earlier. And you can ask for 3 areas of improvement from people, as well as 3 things that you do well. You could ask your manager for more feedback. And in a position of authority within the business, and let's say you're coaching and supporting members of a team, you could ask them for feedback as well. Because what that will do is that will strengthen the relationship you have within the team, and increase trust. But it will also give you some feedback, from team members. You can do a 360. So we've got a 360 that we use. We also have a team diagnostic tool that you can avail yourself of to support you with that. But ask other people. That's what I would say. And also pay more attention to yourself. So how you are in, say, social settings, for example. Are you as confident as you'd like to be? And if not, what could you improve?
And we've got time for a couple of minutes left. So time for one more question, Alison, and this is the one we've got here. How do you How do you prioritize some goals over others? I find I set myself too many goals at once and don't finish any of them.
Okay, again, I only heard the last bit around that, which was setting too many goals and not finishing them.
Alison, I just want to read that again. So
yeah,
how do you prioritize some goals over others? I find I set myself too many goals at once and don't finish any of them.
Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 separate answers to that very quickly, in order for us to finish on time. If it's work goals, get some help from somebody that you work with in terms of prioritizing them, because that would be linked to business outcomes. If it's personal goals, and I find that I've got too many, I just focus on one at a time. And once I've achieved that goal, I then move on to the next one. So just in the interest of time, I just want to really thank all of you for your participation today, and just say have a really fabulous weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you all for turning up. 3:30 on the dot. Anyway, again, thank you very much, and goodbye.